In her third year together, Merle Truman fell in love with the school flower. My roommates thought I was going crazy, and would run over and question him. But until the photos of them kissing in public at the party spread around the campus, I didn't react. Not only that, but I didn't even have a message. Not a single phone call. No one knows. I'm in Merle Truman's cousin's bed right now, wearing his white shirt and looking at the bright red on the sky blue sheets. I said embarrassedly, "Sorry for staining your sheets. I'll clean them up now." Lucien Truman took his deep gaze away from the bright red, coughed twice with red earlobes, and handed me his pajama pants. "Put them on, and go to sleep." He said hello early and let everyone hide it from me. But the paper couldn't contain the fire. And someone who had already watched the lively good deeds secretly told me, "Everybody knows that Merle Truman and I grew up together for 3 years and I loved him to the point of dying." It was said to be together, but in fact it was just me unilaterally chasing after him. And Merle Truman never called me girlfriend once in front of anyone. This time, Merle Truman made such a big battle in front of the whole school, and everyone thought that I was afraid that I would immediately break through the defense and rush over and cry, and make trouble, and hang myself. Even my roommates messaged me to ask why I didn't stop Merle Truman. No one doesn't like to watch this kind of love triangle bloody plot, and who doesn't like to eat melons? It's just a pity that I didn't react until Merle Truman's passionate kissing photo was topped on a campus forum. The onlookers under the post were somewhat distracted. Even Merle Truman herself didn't look much happy on her face. He kept swiping his phone while holding his new girlfriend. There weren't any messages or phone calls, and there wasn't a single comment under the post that looked like mine. He frowned and waved to everyone around him. "Brothers, don't play ball yet. Let's go. I'll have a treat tonight." Immediately everyone cheered, and I stood in front of the basketball court, quietly watching them come out in a huge crowd. The sharp-eyed one saw me and immediately exclaimed excitedly, "Gloria Keppel." Well, I mean, how could Gloria Keppel not come when it had to do with Merle Truman? Merle Truman jerked her head up, curling the corners of her mouth almost imperceptibly the moment she saw me. I ignored the hecklers and walked straight up to Merle Truman. "Gloria Keppel." He tightened his grip on his new girlfriend's hand a little, looked at me and said lightly, "Feelings can't come reluctantly, and the twisted melon is not sweet. We've known each other for more than 10 years, and I don't want to talk too much and hurt my feelings for so many years. In the future, you will still be my sister in my eyes, and if you have something, you can still come to me." After speaking, he deliberately lowered his voice, "So many people are watching. Don't make trouble. Go back quickly." "Merle Truman." I interrupted him and stepped forward. He frowned, his tone impatient. "Gloria Keppel." Obedient, I hooked the corners of my mouth, spread my palms, and handed him a watch. "I just came to give this back to you." At the sight of the watch, Merle Truman's face suddenly sank. "What are you doing, Gloria Keppel? What's the trick again? You take your watch back, and I'll never pester you again." Merle Truman stared straight at me, her tone cold to frost. "I'm not rare for this money. If you don't want to throw it away, whatever you want." As soon as he finished speaking, I raised my hand and tossed my watch into the trash can on the side. "Just throw away all the things that were given to you before." After that, I didn't give him another look, turned around and left. Merle Truman stood there until she could no longer see Gloria Keppel's back. His face was quite ugly, and someone around him was immediately busy, playing the round, "It's okay, Lucien Truman. Gloria Keppel is just thin-skinned, and wants to save face. You see, she'll regret it again tonight, and maybe she'll come back crying and rummaging through the trash can when we're gone." Merle Truman smiled contemptuously at this. "She's going to make a fuss. If it weren't for the face of the 2 patriarchs, I wouldn't have bothered to deal with her." "All right, okay. Don't be angry. We're going to celebrate tonight. Don't let her be ruined." Merle Truman glanced at her beautiful new girlfriend, and left Gloria Keppel's obnoxious face behind. Anyway, the next day, Gloria Keppel would come to him with the cheekiness to come to class as if nothing had happened. This kind of trick, he has seen many times. It was raining heavily, and I slowly walked to the river with my umbrella. The river was rolling, and I looked at the water and recalled a notebook I had seen the other day. The notes tell the story of my love-hate relationship with Merle Truman. In the note, I cried and made a big fuss about Merle Truman's confession to the schoolgirl Isabella. and jumped off the bridge to force him to break up. Fortunately, I met a kind person who rescued me, but I still lost half my life. But Merle Truman, on the other hand, only glanced at me through the glass outside the room, and then turned away to celebrate Isabella's birthday. The adoptive parents of the Keppel family thought it was too embarrassing for me to seek my death, and because of Merle Truman's attitude, they felt that I was no longer useful. He sent me back to my biological parents, who could only suck blood. My life was shattered, and I ended up dying alone in a foreign land. At the end of the note, it was the person I had never paid attention to who had done the funeral for me. Merle Truman, on the other hand, married Isabella sweetly and never remembered me again. The day after I finished reading it, the notes disappeared inexplicably. But what is happening these days shows that it is all real. If I hadn't opened the notebook, I would have been frantically calling Merle Truman, standing on the bridge and tearfully begging him to break up. I'm grateful for this notebook, which laid out the mistakes I had made in front of me, so that I could wake up and make up for my mistakes. I pulled out my phone and dialed the phone in my memory. Once, twice. It wasn't until the third time that it finally got through. I clutched my phone and silently recited the name countless times in my mind, but when I actually said it, I couldn't help but be nervous. The noise of the rain blocked out all the sounds around it. On the other end of the line, Lucien Truman's deep voice rang lazily. Gloria Keppel. Lucien Truman, it's raining so hard. I can't go back on the bridge. Can you come and pick me up? There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. I clutched my umbrella and held my breath nervously. In the notes, Lucien Truman seemed to be crying as he collected my body. His tears fell on my rotting bones as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. Later, he carried a small knuckle of my finger with him for the rest of his life, until he died alone. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but be moved, and choked out his name. What are you crying about? Lucien Truman's cold voice came, a little impatient. I didn't say no. And when are you coming? Wait. Soon. 15 minutes. Okay. I nodded. I'll wait for you then. The phone hung up. I looked around and gave my umbrella to a cleaner sheltered from the rain. By the time Lucien Truman's car pulled up in front of me, I was soaking wet. He got out of the car, his thin lips straight, and his face was as cold as snow. I brushed the hair from my face and smiled at him. Brother Lucien Truman, you're so punctual. With a cold face, he grabbed me and stuffed me into the car, and his tone was a little hateful. Gloria Keppel. Stupid you. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror and threw over a blanket. Wipe it clean. Don't get my car dirty. I obediently covered myself with a blanket and couldn't help but secretly look at him as he drove. Lucien Truman, when he has no expression, looks unapproachable and rejects people from thousands of miles away. At the beginning, there were many girls in the school who liked him, but no one dared to confess it. He and Merle Truman are cousins, and Merle Truman lives with him in the Truman family villa because the dormitory is too small. Every time I went to see Merle Truman, he frowned and looked disgusted. Just like now, although he came to pick me up, his attitude was still cold. I was all about Merle Truman, and I didn't have much contact with him. I looked down at the red mark on my hand that he had pinched, and I couldn't tell that this person liked me. But everything that had happened in the notes had changed since I had changed. Lucien Truman, will he still like me? If he doesn't feel anything about me at all, then I'm not bothering people. Go home. Lucien Truman suddenly looked back at me. I was startled, and I blurted out, yes. Back to your house. Lucien Truman spun back, grabbed the steering wheel and sneered. Merle Truman isn't coming back today. I know. I pinched the blanket with trepidation. I'm not looking for him. The car suddenly braked to a stop on the side of the road, and I hurriedly held on to my seat. He turned around, his eyes so cold that I didn't dare look at him. Gloria Keppel, I'm part of your play. I'm not. He looked at me for a moment, and then took out his phone. I called a taxi for you. You can go back by yourself. Lucien Truman. I bit my lower lip and snatched his phone. Don't. He looked at me with a complicated look in his eyes. There was no anger and disgust, but it made me feel a little sad for no reason. I don't want to go home, and I don't want to go back to my dorm. My uncle and aunt will definitely be angry when they find out, and my roommates will definitely laugh at me. I pinched his phone, my head lowering and lowering. But if you really hate me, forget it. The moment he finished speaking, Tears rolled down silently. Lucien Truman didn't say anything more, just started the car and drove all the way, and finally stopped in front of Truman's villa. I followed him through the door. He grabbed a clean plain white shirt from the closet and threw it to me. The bathroom is over there. He was tall, and his shirt was long on me, almost up to my knees. I came out straight out of my shirt after washing, revealing a pair of legs, and he looked at me and hurriedly looked away. I sat in his room and wiped my hair, and the shampoo and shower gel on my body smelled the same as Lucien Truman's. In the same space, the same smell enveloped the two of them, like warmth that could not be seen or touched, but grew everywhere. Lucien Truman picked up the cigarette case on the bedside table, and went to the balcony. I'm going to smoke a cigarette. I looked at Lucien Truman's room. The sky blue color was clean and simple, and there were computers and books on the desk, and I was a little curious to check it out. But the phone rang. The screen lit up with Merle Truman's name. I just hung up, but the other end came back again, and it went on and on. I just turned it to mute and put it in my bag, out of sight and out of mind. When I turned my head, I saw a bright red on the sheets, and my face immediately warmed up. Lucien Truman. I called out his name, and he quickly turned and walked over. What's wrong? He and I looked at each other for 2 seconds before hurriedly looking away and unconsciously touching our noses. I bit my lower lip. Sorry for staining your sheets. I'll clean them up for you. His deep gaze took his eyes off the bright red, and he coughed dryly with red earlobes. Go blow your hair. I'll clean it up. As he spoke, he handed me a pair of pajama pants. Put them on before you go to sleep. I took my pants and went into the bathroom, and I couldn't help but laugh at the memory of how he had just looked slightly cramped. By the time I came out, he had already changed the sheets and handed me a black bag. I was a little surprised to take the bag and open it to see that it was all for day and night. I asked the convenience clerk. He scratched the back of his head uncomfortably. You go to sleep. What about you? Lucien Truman pulled back from his chair and said, I'll look at the papers. Oh, I slumped and sat down on the bed. He turned on his computer and was just about to put on his headphones when a call came in. He glanced up at me before he pressed answer. Merle Truman. My heart tightened, and I was silent. I'm at home and I heard someone saw Gloria Keppel coming. He turned to look at me again. The opening would be heard, and in desperation, I got up and walked briskly over to him, sat down on his lap, and whispered in his ear in a low voice, Don't tell him. Lucien Truman stiffened, and then tried to push me away, but I grabbed me by the neck. It was so close that I could even hear his pounding heartbeat. He looked down at me, his eyebrows deep, and his eyes darkened. She didn't come. I've been at home and haven't seen her, so you can ask someone else. Lucien Truman hung up the phone. He tossed his phone aside, opened his hands around my waist, and clasped it firmly in his arms. I felt like I was embracing a volcano that was about to erupt and subconsciously wanted to run away. His kiss landed on my lips without saying anything. Gloria Keppel. Don't hook me. I don't want to touch you at this time. I twisted to adjust my seat. The volcano was about to erupt, and the pressure was terrifying. In the gap between the breaths, I finally had a chance to speak. Don't you want to touch? Still kiss me. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead against mine. His breath was entangled, and he closed his eyes, as if at peace. Will you kiss? My mouth is swollen. Don't worry. His eyes were still closed, but the hand around my waist loosened slightly. His fingers were slender and powerful, and it hurt me to pinch them. I frowned and pushed him, but I couldn't. He held my fingers and clasped them together. Don't move. I'll be lighter this time. As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his hands on my back and pressed my whole body into his arms. This time, his strength was gentle and delicate, and his strings were long. In the end, it got a little out of control, and it was so deep that it felt like it was going to swallow me up. I finally had a gap when I was ventilating, and bit him gently. Gloria Keppel. Lucien Truman's voice was low and hoarse. His palms were hot, and his muscles were tense. He buried his head in the side of my neck and snorted in a low voice. The volcano calmed down, but it returned again. He pushed me away and stood up, looking weird. I couldn't help but ask, Lucien Truman, what's wrong? His ears were so red that they were dripping blood, and the person who had always been cold and detached was now on the verge of losing control. I'm going to take a shower. He stood up and didn't forget to help me straighten my crumpled clothes. You go to sleep first. Before I could reply, he hurried into the bathroom. The sound of water sounded, and I rolled on Lucien Truman's bed, my face hot to the touch. I guessed the point. It's just that Lucien Truman looks tall and often exercised, and his figure is well maintained. The bridge of the nose is erect and the jaw is clear. I can't tell it's that kind of boy. Does he not have a girlfriend and has never been in contact with a girl? Thinking like this, I feel like bubbles are bubbling out of my heart. I was lying on his pillow, and accidentally touched something under it. I took it out, and it was a hairpin, and it looked familiar. It's the pair I love to wear every day. I once came to look for Merle Truman, and accidentally lost one, and I couldn't find it. It turned out to be in the hands of Lucien Truman. I looked at it for a while, and finally put the hairpin back under his pillow. The sound of the water stopped, and Lucien Truman came out of the bathroom. He was wearing a navy blue lounge suit, and his skin looked as white as jade. The jet black hair hung down softly, and the usual sharpness faded a little. I don't know if it's my delusion, but Lucien Truman looks like it's a bit well behaved at this time. I was about to call him, but there was a faint sound of voice downstairs. I was shocked and froze where I was. There was clearly a Merle Truman in the voice that spoke. Lucien Truman's face changed, but he reacted quickly. He tucked my clothes into the closet, shoes under the bed, and covered me with a quilt. Merle Truman knocked on the door outside. Brother, are you there? Enter. There was only a night light at the head of the bed in the room, and the light was dim and dim. When Merle Truman came in, he could only see an inconspicuous bulge on the bed. Why did you go to bed so early? Merle Truman looked at it curiously. It's a bit of a headache in the rain. Lucien Truman leaned against the head of the bed and said lightly. I hid under the covers and nervously held my breath. Merle Truman didn't ask any more questions, took his phone and started to call, but he didn't get through a few in a row, and he looked a little annoyed. Brother, did you say Gloria Keppel did it on purpose? What? I just confessed to Isabella today, and she did this whole thing. Just now it was said on TV that a female college student committed suicide by jumping into the river. I thought it was her, so I hurriedly drove over, but it turned out to be not. I called her all night and didn't answer any of my calls, and I still can't find anyone. He sneered as he threw the phone on the table. She just did it on purpose, deliberately messed up my date tonight. I think she's going to haunt me for the rest of her life. Not necessarily. Lucien Truman snapped up. Merle Truman was stunned for a moment, a little surprised. Not necessarily. It's not like you haven't seen how she's been stalking me all these years. And didn't you never give her a good look? Hearing this, I took Lucien Truman's finger and took a bite. His whole body tensed suddenly, and he took a low breath. What's wrong? It's okay. My feet are cramping. Lucien Truman's voice was low, and he coughed twice. Okay then, I won't bother you. You can rest, Merle Truman said as she stood up. Lend you the bathroom. It occurred to me that after I washed my hair, the rubber band was just on the sink, and I hadn't taken it yet. Sure enough, within 2 minutes, Merle Truman came out with a playful smile on her face. Brother, did you bring your sister back? With such a drop of water, which immortal can get our Cowlin flowers? Don't talk nonsense. Merle Truman then noticed the bulge on the other side of the bed, and took a few steps in this direction. Bedtime so early. Tibetan. Merle Truman. Lucien Truman fell silent. Good, good. Merle Truman stopped, but his eyes were still looking at him with interest. Are you ready? I have a lot of this. Do you want to give you a few? Lucien Truman smoothed my hair under the covers and told me to lie down and stay still. When he looked up at Merle Truman again, his voice was much colder. Don't make fun of girls. Merle Truman was surprised. Are you serious? The corners of Lucien Truman's mouth tightened. If the light was brighter, Merle Truman could see how wrong his expression was. Although Lucien Truman pinched my shoulders and kept me from moving, my hands were alive. I gave him a good touch of his abs under the covers. Every time I touched it, he tightened a little tighter, and I sneaked my hand into the mermaid line, and he reacted so loudly that it startled me. Okay, don't bother you. I'll live outside today. Merle Truman glanced meaningfully at Lucien Truman's bed, still a little disdainful before heading out. On weekdays, she looks cold, and she doesn't look close to women. It doesn't seem to be very serious now. If he guessed correctly, there must be a girl under Lucien Truman's quilt. It's quite flowery, but he didn't break it. After all, he and Lucien Truman are cousins, and they have a good relationship. It's just that Lucien Truman is more popular among girls, which makes him a little unhappy. When he closed the door, I lifted the covers. Lucien Truman, I'm suffocating. Lucien Truman leaned against the head of the bed, his eyes deep. The warm yellow light fell on his side face, and his facial features were handsome and three-dimensional, and I was stunned for a while. Under the shadow, his eyebrows and eyes seemed to be picturesque. Gloria Keppel. He slowly got up and reached out to gently pull the hair from my face, holding my face and saying seriously, I don't hate you, I didn't show you a face. Don't take his words seriously. After he finished speaking, he put down his hand and covered the quilt for me. You sleep. What about you? He took another cigarette and pointed to the balcony. I'll smoke a cigarette and go to sleep. I happened to let out a sneeze, and he paused. I reached out and grabbed his sleeve and looked at him pitifully. I feel like I have a cold, and my head hurts. He looked at me for a moment. You let go first. I'll get you medicine. I honestly finished taking the pills, but I still wouldn't let go, Brother Lucien Truman. I'm a little cold. This time, he pushed me away. Gloria Keppel. He's gone. You don't have to do it anymore. I wondered, what does this have to do with him? He smiled mockingly. What are you doing by the river today? That's when I remembered. It turned out that Merle Truman's words had misled him, and he thought that I was going to the river because I couldn't find a short-sightedness. Calling him home with him was a deliberate attempt to off Merle Truman. It is normal for him to think this way. After all, Keppel's parents have been in a hurry for the past 2 years. They had found their own child, and wanted to send me back. But considering that I still have the use of a business marriage, I was reluctantly kept. So Merle Truman is like a lifesaver for me. I thought we grew up together, and there was still some love for growing up together. I expected him to save me from the quagmire and put all my hope in him. But all this, in the eyes of others, is evidence that I love him to the point of madness? Not to mention Lucien Truman, who is cousin to Merle Truman and lives together, and has witnessed a lot of my humble begging. Lucien Truman, I tried to explain to him, but he had already gotten up, set the alarm clock, and leave early tomorrow to save people from seeing. It's not a good thing after all. Lucien Truman, I was a little anxious, but he still didn't look back. I gritted my teeth. You kissed me so many times today, and you just returned. Aren't you going to be responsible? He jerked his head back. I sat on the bed with red eyes, but I couldn't hold back my tears. I know you hate me. Every time I come, you don't like to talk to me. But thank you tonight. Thank you for taking me in. If you think I've caused you trouble, and don't want to have anything to do with me, I'll go. I got up and got out of bed, walked out with my head down and bare feet. By the time he passed by Lucien Truman, tears were already streaming down his face. He grabbed my arm. I just said that I didn't hate you. Are you responsible? I looked up at him. You just kissed and hugged him. And also, Lucien Truman suddenly grabbed my face and kissed it hard. Gloria Keppel. He touched and sucked on my lips, and his breathing intensified. If you have to provoke me, you have to be responsible. I hugged his lean waist and held my head high in response. Okay. During the holidays, I went back to my hometown to meet my biological parents. I stayed for 3 days, and by the time I left, the men who were eating, drinking, prostituting and gambling were already in prison. Gambling, trafficking, stealing, robbery, and all of them are enough to spend the rest of their lives in prison. Thanks to that notebook, I have ironclad evidence in my hand, and all that awaits them is prison life. There is no need for rebirth, and there is no need for any next life. I seized the opportunity to make them no longer persecute me in this life. As I got on the plane back, I let out a long breath of turbidity. A piece of my heart has finally landed, and no matter what happens in the future, I will not fall into the situation of being persecuted to death. When the plane landed, I was the first to tell Lucien Truman that it was safe. He didn't know the purpose of my trip, and thought I had been out with my friends for a few days. I'll look for you at night. Have you packed your things? Finding it inconvenient to live with Merle Truman, he moved out of the villa and found another house. I've packed it up. I'm going to pick you up. Okay. Gloria Keppel. What's wrong? Today is Merle Truman's birthday. He formed a game and invited me to bring my girlfriend over. I almost forgot that Merle Truman's birthday was also on these days. Do you want to come with me? I was a little hesitant. It's not that I don't want to make my relationship open with him, but I'm worried that the Keppel family will cut ties with me. When the time comes, my unbearable origins will be known to everyone. Lucien Truman doesn't care, but I can't help it. I can't bear to let him be criticized because of me. Just like in the story, he was accused by his parents of being unfilial and unrighteous for a woman like me. But like Lucien Truman said, I'm also responsible for him. In life, you can't be too greedy for both. Lucien Truman. I took a deep breath. Do you want me to go with you? Yes, he replied without hesitation. Then come and pick me up. I'll go with you. After I said this, I looked up and saw my smiling face on the glass window. It turns out that being able to stand side by side with him makes me so happy. Gloria Keppel. Look out. My heart was suffocating, and I turned around. The sound of the electronic announcements in my ears fading away, the crowds coming and going, and I could only see Lucien Truman. I let go of my suitcase and ran towards him, as if the whole world had been left behind me. He stood there and opened his arms to me. I threw myself into his arms, and he caught me steadily, not taking a step back. I hugged his waist, raised my head and smiled jokingly. Little brother's core strength is very strong. He raised his eyebrows and chuckled. The waist is not bad. Do you want to try it? I poked his abs and chuckled. It just seems to be a little fast. Gloria Keppel. He chuckled helplessly, his eyes full of unconvinced. You wait. You will feel good then. Don't cry then. It's useless to beg for mercy. Merle Truman's birthday party is always lively, with a large crowd every year. Isabella is also dressed up and glamorous. The two of them sat together and looked very good, and Isabella was praised by a group of people. She couldn't help but look at Merle Truman, only to find him a little absent-minded. Merle Truman, Merle Truman. Isabella called him several times before he came back to his senses. What's wrong? It's not early. Everyone's hungry. Let's start. What's the hurry? The people haven't been together yet. Who's missing? Yes, who hasn't come? Lucien Truman hasn't arrived yet. Hey, it suddenly occurred to me. Gloria Keppel. Gloria Keppel hasn't come yet. Gloria Keppel is coming. It's Merle Truman's birthday. Can she come? She's not going to miss it. Merle Truman abruptly interrupted. I didn't invite her. If she comes, I won't let her in. Merle Truman. Don't be angry. Isabella hurriedly comforted softly. Don't spoil your mood because of someone who doesn't matter. Do you? Merle Truman looked at her new girlfriend, and Isabella was really beautiful. Gloria Keppel is actually beautiful, but not in this way. So he was immediately attracted to Isabella and decided to chase her. But after being together, he felt that it was actually nothing more than that. For a month, Gloria Keppel didn't wait downstairs for his classes, didn't eat with him, and seemed to have suddenly disappeared from his world. Occasionally bumped into at school, but she would also turn around in a hurry to avoid it. Merle Truman had to admit that this made him very uncomfortable. He still put it down to habit. He just wasn't used to a person who revolved around him every day, suddenly cold and alienated. How could he like Gloria Keppel, an imposter lady, who doesn't deserve Merle Truman's wrath for her? But in the end, there are so many years of love. Merle Truman thought, just tonight, if Gloria Keppel had come to him tonight, he wouldn't even have to bow his head and give in, just shed a few tears. He always had a place for her to have by his side. Suddenly, the box was pushed open, and the boy who came in looked mysterious. Guess who I saw? Who? It can't be Gloria Keppel, right? Oh, don't say it. It's really her. I'll just say Merle Truman. She can't live without you. Merle Truman didn't squeak, but the gloom on her face disappeared for the most part. But Isabella's face wasn't so good looking. She tugged at Merle Truman's sleeve. Merle Truman, are you going to let her go? She pestered you for so long. I felt a little uncomfortable. Merle Truman looked at her face, and suddenly felt that she was much more pleasing to the eye than before. His mood suddenly improved, and he thought nonchalantly, Gloria Keppel makes him angry during this time, and although he decides to forgive her, he also wants to punish her. He pinched Isabella's face and pursed his lips. Okay, then let her go. Who's going to get out? The door slammed open, and Lucien Truman strode in. He wasn't loud, but he landed soundly. Everyone was silent in the huge room, because everyone saw it, holding a girl behind him. It's Gloria Keppel. Merle Truman sat still, but the goblet in his hand was suddenly crushed. Isabella was startled and screamed, "Blood! Merle Truman, you're bleeding. Get out, Merle Truman. I told you to get out. Can't you understand people?" Merle Truman stood up abruptly and slammed her glass to the ground. Isabella was stunned for a moment before she came to her senses and ran out crying. The others in the box also closed their mouths in amusement. Merle Truman's hand drooped, blood dripping down, but he didn't realize it, just stared at Lucien Truman. "Lucien Truman, won't you explain it to me?" Lucien Truman held my fingers tightly, and I couldn't help but feel at ease. "Explain what? Why did Gloria Keppel come with you? Didn't you say that?" Lucien Truman chuckled. "Let me bring my girlfriend along." "Forgot." Merle Truman was instantly enraged, picked up the cup on the table and smashed it on the ground. "Do you know that Gloria Keppel is my man? Your people. Who are you?" Lucien Truman's tone was light-hearted. "Or is it that as long as a girl likes you, it becomes your private property?" Merle Truman's eyes flushed. "You know Gloria Keppel likes me, and you pry me into the corner." I looked at him and stepped forward. I took the initiative. "Also, I don't like you. I didn't like you for a long time." The moment I said that, I suddenly found myself relieved. After all, any normal girl would not like a man who tramples his dignity under his feet. I won't like a man who is unsentimental and condescending to himself. In the years when we grew up together, there was still some affection between us. But when my identity was exposed and I was no longer the glamorous eldest lady, he no longer had me in his heart. "Gloria Keppel. What are you talking about?" Merle Truman seemed to hear some kind of joke. "You almost jumped into the river for me, and now you're embarrassed to say you don't like me." "I never wanted to jump into the river for you. You don't deserve it." That night, I was just trying to find a reason for Lucien Truman to pick me up. He was stunned for a moment, and then stared at me, with tears in his eyes. "You mean, you were the one who was in the villa, in Lucien Truman's bed that day?" I confessed. "It's me." "So what, Merle Truman? You can talk about your love. I said a long time ago, I will never pester you again, and I will never regret it." I didn't look at him again, and pulled Lucien Truman to turn away. "Let's go. I don't want to stay with these people. Go back and see our new home." But Lucien Truman didn't move. He stood there and looked at Merle Truman, his eyes sharp. "Merle Truman, I don't want to hear anyone criticize my girlfriend in the future." Merle Truman had lost his mind and opened his mouth to scold. "How do you think you're old?" Lucien Truman sneered. "I'm the oldest. Why don't you go back and ask your son?" Merle Truman was silent, and for a moment, he fixed his gaze on my face, and his face was a little hideous. "Gloria Keppel. Lucien Truman shouldn't know about the fact that you're not the eldest lady of the Keppel family, right? It's immoral to hide such an important thing from others, right?" I froze as Lucien Truman's fingers held my hand. Although I was ready to confess, I was still a little at a loss to be revealed in front of everyone. Seeing my face change, Merle Truman smiled with satisfaction. "Look, I knew you were hiding it from him. I'll just say, if you tell Lucien Truman about your background, he won't touch you even if you send it to the door." Merle Truman. Lucien Truman suddenly let go of my hand, began to fold his sleeves with a blank face, and took off the watch in his hand, and handed it to me. "I used to think that you weren't a good thing, but it's not an unforgivable sin. But now I find out you're a scumbag." The fist landed in Merle Truman's face, and he was furious and tried to fight back, but was knocked to the ground by the next punch. "You're still a coward. Trash. I'm not like you like this. It doesn't matter what the Keppel family is. I just like Gloria Keppel. I like Gloria Keppel when she's called Gloria Keppel. I like Gloria Keppel when she's called Gloria Evelyn. But she's not clean anymore. Merle Truman was about to say something, but was punched in the mouth by Lucien Truman. He screamed in pain and fell to the ground with his face covered. I hurriedly grabbed Lucien Truman. "Stop fighting. It's not good if something happens." His face was cold, but he still obediently stopped and called someone to clean up the aftermath. After the arrangements were made, he picked me up and walked out. "Gloria Keppel, let's go home." When I got in the car, I couldn't help but ask Lucien Truman, "Can you believe it? What?" His face has not yet eased. and his momentum is pressing. If it was before, I would definitely hide far away. The elders who used to love me became cold and alienated overnight, and they grew up together day and night and looked down on me from the bottom of their hearts. And their biological parents were also scum who saw money. Every day I was afraid that I would fall into the abyss, and I didn't know that anyone loved me that way until I died. But this time I haven't reached the end of my rope yet, and I'm not stupid enough to trade my body for Merle Truman's affection. Nothing happened to me and Merle Truman. I didn't. Lucien Truman turned his head and kissed me on the cheek. I believe in you. I don't care about that, but I'm kind of happy to hear you say that. I finally burst into tears and laughed. I know, Lucien Truman. I'm telling you this because I don't want him to splash dirty water on me. I'm afraid I'll dirty you. I slipped into his arms. Let's go home. He held my hand tightly. Okay. I took the time to go back to Keppel's house. With the help of the real lady Rebecca Keppel, I finally got my account back. From then on, I had nothing to do with the Keppel family. I knew that if they knew about my relationship with Lucien Truman, they would do everything they could to rely on me to suck the blood of the Truman family. I don't want Lucien Truman to be caught up in this filthy maelstrom as well. When I left, Mrs. Keppel was so cold that she didn't even want to look at me a few more times. But I've seen that the Keppel family still has a little nurturing grace for me, and although it didn't give me much affection, at least it didn't let me fall into the hands of my biological parents. Rebecca Keppel gave me a ride out of the house all the way to the gate. Thank you, sister. I hugged her, my eyes a little pantothenic. In the story, she always made things difficult for me, but this time, she helped me become the unfettered and free Gloria Keppel. I thank her. Rebecca Keppel also burst into tears and shook my hand tightly. Gloria Keppel, this time you must be happy. Then Lucien Truman took me to meet Truman's parents. Surprisingly, Mrs. Truman was very nice to me. Her eyes were red. She held my hand, and she said that we would be a family, and that I would be with Lucien Truman. I couldn't help but be moved, and 2 lines of tears rolled down. To meet Lucien Truman and his family is probably God's compensation for me. As for Merle Truman, he married Lucien Truman after his birthday. He changed his old self and started to get into a business that he was not interested in before, just to compete with Lucien Truman. But he has been abandoned for too long, and he is no match for Lucien Truman in the mall. Not only did he not succeed, but he also lost a lot of money. Truman's parents thought that he was uneducated and unskilled, and it was too embarrassing to stay in the country, so they forced him to go abroad. Isabella also finally understood after that day that he was not a person to rely on at all, and never returned to him, leaving him alone. On the day Merle Truman went abroad alone, he called me. I was in Lucien Truman's study, leaning against him, enjoying the afternoon sun and breeze, turning the pages of my hand from time to time. The phone rings, revealing an incoming call from Merle Truman. Don't hang up. He raised an eyebrow with interest. I'll hear what else he has to say. I pressed the button and Merle Truman's tired voice came from the other end of the line. Gloria Keppel, I'm going abroad. Do you know? I often wonder if everything would have been different if I had gone to the river to pick you up that day. No, it won't. Before I could speak, Lucien Truman interrupted him lightly. Merle Truman, you can go in peace. I'll send you an invitation to the wedding. There was a sound of heavy breathing on the other end of the phone, and finally hung up. I couldn't help but snicker in my heart. Lucien Truman was so hard at it. Lovely. After graduating, Lucien Truman and I got our certificates. On my wedding night, I pulled the hairpin out from under his pillow. A few strands of hair fell, and I gently pinned them to my ear, and kissed Lucien Truman's lips. Lucien Truman, when the hell did you fall in love with me? He refused to answer, kissed me earnestly, breathing heavily, and the hand holding me gradually tightened. Don't say it, then I won't say I like you. He raised his eyes, his gaze heavy. Actually, it was the first time I met you. I thought I'd never get a chance to let you know in my life. It's okay. I hugged him firmly. We still have a lifetime to be together. You can tell me slowly. The end.